Welcome to Hotel Sourcing Sorcery, working a little magic to give your hotel program some extra leverage. My name is Karina Barr, and I will be providing technical support during this webinar. Before we get started, I'd like to go over a few items so you know how to participate in this event. You should see a control panel on the right side of your computer desktop. You can listen to the session either by using your computer speakers or joining in through the phone. If you've decided to listen by phone, please make sure to select telephone in the audio pane of your control panel and enter all of the telephone information that's displayed there, including the audio pin. And you will have the opportunity to submit text questions to our presenters by typing your questions into the questions box of your control panel. You can send them in at any time during the presentation. We'll be collecting your questions and addressing them during the Q&A portion to be conducted at the end. I would now like to hand over to Jennifer Steinke, your moderator for today's webinar.
Thanks, Karina. Welcome, everyone. We appreciate your time today. So this is the fourth webinar in Business Travel Executive Magazine's Going Deeper series. And today we're going to talk the exciting topic of hotel sourcing. There's been a lot of, I think, conversation in the industry that has made this topic, I think, maybe more exciting than it used to be, right? Because people are looking at their managed travel programs and the hotel piece of it a little bit differently. So we've got three esteemed panelists. Myself, I'm just going to be moderating the conversation. We've got Karen Hutchings from EY, David Marcus from Hotel Connects, and Steve Reynolds from TRIPBAM. So they're each going to be providing us a perspective on what people are doing in their programs, what are the results that they're seeing, why they're making these decisions, and the impact that it's having in the overall program. So we encourage you to jump in, ask questions. We'll be moderating those questions as just chat them as they come in, and we will leave time for Q&A at the end. So don't hesitate to jump in with those questions at any time. So let's get started. We've got an action-packed hour here. I would like to introduce our first panelist, Karen Hutchings. She's Travel Services Meeting and Events Leader at EY. She just manages a little travel program of only $1.8 billion in spend. She's been BTN's Multinational Travel Manager of the Year. She's the chairman of Institute of Travel and Meetings since May of 2017. And she's been in the business with multiple other organizations managing travel. So Karen has got a very interesting perspective, I would say, on what they're doing at EY as far as hotel sourcing goes. And so I was actually sitting in another event with her one day, and we started talking about our program, and we were sitting around a round table, and then all of a sudden everybody's ears were perking up because I think they've taken a very innovative approach to what they're doing in hotel sourcing. So I'd like Karen to share some of that information with you now, and we'll kind of have a conversation about how successful it's been, challenges, and things like that. So Karen, welcome, and thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it today.
Well, thank you for having me on this panel today, and the interest that we seem to have created in what we've done in relation to our hotel program. And I think, to Jen's point earlier, I think we all feel in the industry that the hotel RFP as it stands was a fairly broken process. And what we really thought about was, how do we look at it differently, taking into account really what is our key driver in anything that we do within our travel program, which is around compliance, it's around savings, but it's also around that employee engagement, making sure that we retain our talent. And I think, what's being done in studies, if we go on to the next slide, is that if you actually have an engaged workforce, then they will feel much better about the program that you have than if you have a disengaged workforce. And how you have an engaged workforce is that you give them choice. And so what we looked at really was about how do we go from a program that has a certain number of preferred properties to really opening up choice to our employees. And so what we decided to do as a result of that is ultimately throw out the traditional RFP process and look at a more dynamic program. Now, when we talked about a dynamic program, though, this wasn't necessarily that we were just going with dynamic hotel rates that fluctuated depending on the occupancy, because we needed to make sure as well that we were putting controls in place too. Do you want to go on to the next slide, Jem? And so what we looked at really was about the fact that if we have a fixed rate, that fixed rate could still change. And in our minds, that still made it, though, dynamic. So for us, dynamic wasn't necessarily that it was a fluctuation of a percentage. But I think the important thing as well for us was the fact that it took 3 people full-time 6 months to actually do our RFP. We had 2,500 preferred hotels in the program, and we would have to negotiate line by line with around 4,000 to get to the 2,500. By actually changing the model and looking at the more dynamic model, we've gone from 2,500 preferred hotels to a program that has 36,000 EY rates. And for us, it really was about how do we maximize the 3 people that we had looking at the hotel program and really give them more interesting roles to do and also bring more benefits to our employees in relation to the hotel program, and that increased on the engagement side. And so what we did to mitigate the cost involved with this, which is the concern that most have on a dynamic program, is that we put in city caps by city that nobody was allowed to spend over. They could stay in any property where there was an EY rate underneath that amount, but they weren't allowed to go over it. So by doing it that way with the dynamic model that we had in some of the chains, it meant that we had a ceiling and that people weren't permitted to go over that. The other element of that as well was we were very open with our city caps. We released them to the hotel so they knew exactly what they were, and you almost created your own marketplace. So if a particular hotel was not seeing the volumes that they were expecting, then they could safely assume that another hotel in the vicinity was offering better rates. And so what we saw then was this sort of marketplace going on and this desire to attract our employees more to stay within those hotels. Next slide. Certainly what we've seen in relation to, why did we do this was, we're opening offices or moving offices fairly regularly. We have 700 different offices across the globe. And what this meant was that we didn't then have to think, well, do we have a rate in the hotel near to the office? We automatically had rates there because it would have been covered by the chain-wide discounts that we had negotiated. Also, if there was just significant increases in volumes that were going on, we had many opportunities as well of different hotels that people could select. And I think just one of the really interesting things that we found was that where we had employees that were very brand loyal, for maybe one point they were staying in a JW Marriott or a W Hotel, they were then going into a Courtyard because if the rate was over the cap, they still had an option of a lower category hotel in that same brand so that they could still retain the points. Because whether we like it or not, for some of our frequent travelers, points are very important. And if you take it back to our first slide earlier, though, which is about employee engagement, it meant that we still managed to retain that with our employees. I think another thing just to think about as a simple thing is that if, for example, we wanted to reduce our expenditure in a particular city or across the program, as an example, we could just take 10% off the city caps immediately, which would ordinarily then reduce the averages that we are paying, because the hotels would then either need to come down to that level or our employees need to select lower priced hotels. One of the things as well is...
Oh, sorry, I just want, a question came in and I think it's important. So how did you determine the city caps? Like, were you just using spend data for just over time, or how did you actually decide, all right, this is what the rate's going to be in this city?
Yeah, great
And then
question.
and how do you
Well,
manage that, like with peak times, like, citywides and things like that?
so the city caps were determined from the data that we had from the year previous. How we drove the city caps in past years was the most expensive hotel in the city drove the city cap. So what we did for the new program was we looked at, well, what was the city cap on that criteria? Was that hotel at the top level being used? If yes, that set the city cap. If no, then we drop the cap down to the next level. You have to find a point in time to set this, and we have tweaked caps as we've gone through this process. So we have reduced them in some areas and we've had to increase them in others based on what's happening. I'm in San Francisco at the minute. San Francisco is a challenge, which I'm sure we can all relate to. And so we've had to tweak that. I think one point just to make as well, where we had fixed pricing, what we did do is a direct comparison of the year previous. And we were very clear with the hotels that if we saw inflated pricing going up to our city cap, which was not in line with industry, we would blacklist hotels. And just to say that we blacklisted 110 hotels that actually saw the city cap as an opportunity to increase a fixed rate that they may have given us. And so they were taken out of the equation completely. And we were very strong and direct with that point when we actually did this.
Gotcha.
Jen, I missed the second part of your question, actually. What was the second part?
No, I think you answered it. It was just about the
Okay.
pricing, what you did in city caps and things like that. So yeah, no, we're good there. So let me just move your slide here.
Perfect.
All right.
And so then for us as well, with this type of travel that we have is we have significant project rates. And so what we saw that we could do for our team ultimately was, rather than going through a line by line negotiation of the hotels, what they could focus on then is speaking to stakeholders, finding out more about what projects are going on, so that we were able to negotiate the projects with the added value that we get there, which is laundry, car parking, food and beverage discounts for a specific project. And that's significant in our space, and actually much more value that can be delivered than 6 months spent ultimately negotiating with 4,000 hotels. Interestingly as well was the corporate housing increase, because we were able to identify much more easily higher volumes. And when we say identify more easily, it was just having the time to be able to do that. We saw significant increase in corporate housing. And at the same time, we introduced our own internal TripAdvisor tool, which was Lobby. And this actually gave the ability for our employees to give feedback on the hotels that they were staying at. So if you think about before, we had a limited number of hotels that we encouraged our employees to stay in. By going with so many more hotels, we wanted the ability for our employees to be able to research where other employees were staying. And in the first 3 months, we had 20,000 plus reviews given of different hotels that people were selecting. But then also we had 6,000 hits of people researching where they were staying. And we launched the two together because, of course, we were opening up to so many more hotels. We wanted to make sure that we gave visibility to our employees of where everybody was staying. This slide just sort of gives you more information around just some of the things that we were able to launch as a result of this. And we have significant targets, as I'm sure many of you do, in relation to diversity spend. And as a result of this, we've actually seen an increase as well in that spend by just opening up more options to employees to select. The next slide, Jem.
If it will advance, let's make this happen here. Okay, there you go.
And then we did a survey with our employees, because if I go back to the first slide that I said, one of the key drivers for us is about employee engagement. And we've had significant positive responses from our travelers who are of all levels within the organization and the travel arrangers. But one of the things absolutely was about the ability of more choice that they had. People don't like to be restricted, actually, and when they're traveling frequently, they want the process of booking something to be simple. And the key thing with this is that, with having more choice, we have kept that process simple. Also, by using some of the innovative tools out there, TRIPBAM, that you're going to hear from later, helped us to be able to rebook people in the same hotel at lower cost as well, so that we were able to take advantage of any of the lower rates that were out there. And so we had comments from our employees that they were seeing their budgets go further. Also, the fact that people had the lobby survey coming through and were able to give their feedback to share with other employees was definitely a positive that people felt. So I think, from our perspective, the great news is now when we launch our RFP this year, all we're going to do is send out in October new city caps. That's it. That's basically our hotel program. We knew the first year was going to be harder because we had to set it up. We will still have some independent hotels that we will have to negotiate with separately, because we don't want to discount them because they're close to our offices or they're liked by our employees. But basically, though, going from 4,000 RFPs will be going down to around 300 that we would need to send out for the independent hotels to get the fixed rates. But actually, the hotel process now is just going to be the city cap listing, which we will send out to our to our hotel chains in October, and then it is down to them to actually come back with the rates. And that's it. That is what we're doing, and we love it, and the team love it as well, because their roles have changed significantly and for the better.
So do you think, you've got a huge spend, right? And not everyone has a program as large as yours. Do you think that for sort of that smaller size company that something like this would work as effectively, or do you think there's a sort of a tipping point where you got to have a lot of spend so you can really drive the the hotels to meet those city caps? And any thoughts on that?
For me, the tipping point is with the hotels and the time that they save through doing the RFP processes. So I don't think it actually matters the size of the program. It's the process that we're challenging here. And the same as a travel buyer has challenges around the time it takes, the hoteliers have that same challenge as well. And so for me, I think from their perspective, if it saves them time to be more creative, innovative in their roles as well, that should be the tipping point, not the spend that there is. Because this is ultimately, it's almost making an Airbnb model of the hotel industry, actually. That's really what's happening here.
That's exactly what I was thinking. I'm like, wow, that's great. That's awesome. Well, thank you so much. We've got some questions for you. I'll pose them as we get towards the end, because we may get some other insight into kind of what's successful in the marketplace today. I know in managing my hotel program, it's just such a pain point. It's just arduous and just, I don't know, nobody likes it. Nobody wants to do it, right? So there's a lot of opportunities, I think, for us to kind of change and drive that process. But, I think as programs mature over time, getting more creative is certainly a highly effective way of doing it. And you're right, the suppliers love it too. So that's great. Thank you, Karen. So let's move on to David. So David Marcus is the VP of Hotel Connects in Strategic Solutions, more than 20 years in the travel industry, previously with Amex GBT in their consulting role, and he was a past managing editor for Business Travel News. So David, I would like to launch with you and ask you this question that relates to what I just said. the small, medium enterprise type stuff where they're just trying to get their arms around it. You know, Karen's got millions, millions and millions, hundreds of millions of dollars in spend with a lot of historical data. Some programs can't, you know, don't have that, right? And so I think you guys are taking a very innovative approach to what's happening in the marketplace from the sourcing side of things. So you got to start somewhere, right? So I'd love for you to share with everyone exactly what you guys are doing and the successes you've had, especially in that small, medium enterprise type business.
Absolutely. Well, first of all, Jen, thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to participate on the panel. And I just want to go back to what you said in the beginning. It's really, really exciting in the industry. I've been involved with hotel consulting for clients since the late 1990s, and there's a lot of change, you know, in terms of the tools out there, in terms of just the model. I mean, Karen spoke to it earlier, you spoke to it. We're moving from that, what I would call that travel management centric model to a traveler model in terms of experience. And that's really impacting every part of the chain, both on the supply side and the demand side. So in terms of what we're seeing, and I've worked, you know, with really such a broad range of clients from small, mid-size to large. When you look at the hotels, some of the changes and the experience on the supply side, we're seeing more diversity in service categories. It isn't just hotels that are luxury or mid-scale, but they're hotels that are actually catering now to that traveler experience. Hotels with themes in certain cities. It could be a historical theme. It could be some other theme that caters to the employee's experience, and we need to take that into account, particularly with the emerging workforce. There are also so that's a degree of complexity when it's not just cost. In addition, we're seeing more and more different distribution channels, whether it's through the travel management company, whether it's direct to the supplier. We're starting to see more and more websites with more and more inventory. So there's more channel fragmentation, more choice in that area. In addition, there's a wide variety of tools. You know, we mentioned Reshop. We mentioned, and I agree, there's the fatigue and the frustration with the RFP process. Yet there are clients out there that still use phone calls and spreadsheets, and you know, that's something we still have to address. There's just a wide spectrum and level of diversity among clients. And there are some, as you mentioned or led into, Jen, there are some similarities and differences in the challenges faced by companies with large spend and mid-sized spend. So if you go to the next slide, I'll just cover some of the common challenges. First of all, there is increased supplier scrutiny on room night production. Many of the folks at the large chains have airline backgrounds. There's a lot of focus on yield management, probably more so with the larger chains as opposed to independent properties. We're still experienced continued errors with rate loading. I don't think that's unknown in the industry. So that's a very big challenge. And as I mentioned earlier, we all mentioned earlier, a lot more focus on the experience because that helps drive employee engagement and control. I agree 100% with that. But at the same time, from a yield management perspective, there is limited last room availability and stringent cancellation policies. And that does put a task on travel managers. Other common challenges, just going to the next slide, is data collection, reporting, and benchmarking. There are more and more new suppliers out there that are working on better data collection. There have been improvements in that area, but there's still challenges. I mean, when you look at the hotel name in a travel record, from an expense management tool, from a card, you could see the same hotel spelled out in multiple different ways. That's still a challenge. And the challenge of data collection and integrating data also creates leakage in terms of spots that you cannot see. And companies really are trying to look at all the different tools out there. A lot are still in that discovery phase. They're looking at the RFP process. As I mentioned, there's some companies that are going from phone calls to spreadsheets to an RFP process. There's some companies looking at reshop, and they're just really trying to figure out, and the big question is, what's the right balance? And what I'm saying, what I'm seeing out there is the balance can be different, not just depending on the spend that you have, depending on the industry you're in, depending on your company policy, and dependent on the goals you have in your hotel program. So there are some challenges that I've seen that are unique in the mid-market space. And this is just, working with different size companies. These are some trends I've seen in the past couple of years. First of all, generally, particularly from the major chains, when you're going through sourcing an RFP process during the fall season, there has been slower responsiveness. So that could actually protract the timeline. In addition, what I mentioned before, there's a lot of supplier scrutiny on the ability to deliver and maintain volume, particularly for those clients that are negotiating fixed deals. I've seen it with smaller companies. I've seen it even stronger. There's increased supplier unwillingness to engage with firms due to that greater scrutiny. So they'll see more and more drops in suppliers accepting hotels in terms of acceptances into their program. That means there's a much greater need for mid-market companies that have deals in place for compliance monitoring and their ability to deliver on commitments. Next slide. In terms of mid-markets, typically, I'm not saying it's impossible, but with companies typically that spend under $10 million annual in hotel, chain-wide agreements are more difficult to obtain in terms of a supplement to a property negotiation. And I'll cover that a little bit later in terms of the mix of solutions clients might want to consider putting together in terms of the balance. Data analytics is reporting. In reporting, that's really critical. And again, many smaller mid-sized companies don't have the same resource investment levels that larger companies have in terms of investing that in doing reporting on their own. I even recall when I worked with a large client, they pretty much asked me just when I worked for TMC, please provide me with the reporting. We have the analysts on staff. We could do the interpretation and recommendations. That's a little bit more challenging with companies with smaller spend, and of course, continued errors with rate loading. And the challenge for mid-market, the mid-market challenge is really less resource and investment to overcome those challenges with putting in the resource to monitor whether the rates get loaded or not. In terms of what clients are looking for, definitely for those that are using the traditional 6-month off-season flexibility and year-round sourcing, doing it different times of the year. I've seen certain clients move from fall season sourcing to fiscal year sourcing. Stronger analytics and a bigger focus. We mentioned the RFP processing, more time focused on the negotiations, the deal versus the RFP processing. There is still many clients that I've worked with. There is still a need for direct relationships with preferred hotels, and a lot of the preferred hotels that are doing direct deals with clients want to have those property managers want to have direct relationships with the clients. And of course, compliance on the supply and demand side. On the supply side, that means the actual rates getting loaded so that the travelers can access those rates. And then on the demand side, helping the travelers actually book those rates. So the company's getting the savings, but the travelers are also booking the hotels that they desire within the construct of the program. In terms of additional ideas, there are clients, again, it's a very wide spectrum. There are clients looking for easy to navigate RFP tools. So there are clients that still look for RFP tools that are easy to manage. And really the key thing is balance. So if it's negotiating fixed rates, if it's dynamic rates, if it's using the hotel program that the travel management company offers, emerging technologies that we're talking about, open booking, all of this is being thrown. And again, we have different types of clients, a very broad range with different capabilities, different corporate cultures. And what we're really being asked to do is help them come up with the right balance of programs that works for them from a unique standpoint.
So, David,
Sure.
you're seeing that people are looking again for that sort of just the right combination, that right fit, right? So it could be multiple sources, multiple approaches, right? So that's still fairly prevalent, and most organizations are still kind of trying to find that balance. Would you agree?
I would agree. I don't want to sound cliche, but I'm thinking from the standpoint from what I've seen, evolution, not revolution. So there are definitely changes. There are definitely best practice approaches, and certain companies that do have the wherewithal to move the RFP process out. But right now, with the flux in the industry, it's really an evolution, and the balance is going to be different company by company.
Sure. Okay, great.
Okay. So in terms of what companies are doing to offset challenges in negotiating programs, I'm starting to see more and more negotiating off-season or year-round, or what's known as continuous sourcing, not just in the RFP season. A lot of companies now are bringing more and more independent hotels into the program mix, particularly mid-market customers, because independent hotels tend to be more receptive in many cases to companies with smaller spend. There is a lot of clients are putting pressure on their TMCs or specialty firms to still deal with the nuts and bolts of RFP management. It is problematic from a resource, so that is still being outsourced. And more companies, this is something I've seen over the years, typically require multiple reporting options. So you have the challenge of the different data sources, travel, card, and spend, but many different procurement departments. I've worked with private equity, pharma, manufacturing. A lot of them have different metrics in terms of how they measure success. From a savings perspective, whether it's, is it year over year? Is it savings off best available rate? Is it benchmarking against peer companies? Is it measuring cost avoidance against market movement? So there are a lot of different reporting options that travel managers have to contend with. And then, of course, a big need in what they're doing is implementing more and more frequent compliance reporting and more effective analytics to assess and reduce leakage to ensure that they have the right dashboard in place. In terms of the next slide. So this is, from a balance perspective, I've seen a mix and I've used 4 different components in terms of how the balance and the weighting will be different depending on the company. But typically, looking at if you look at the top left on the slide, there's what you call directly sourced deals, which could be negotiating fixed rates or even supplementing those with dynamic rates. But it needs to be the savings need to be targeted. So in a mid-size or even a smaller company, the focus is really on the analytics. Because the RFP process is so lengthy and it is a strain on resource, you want to make sure when you're using it that it's very targeted. And even with mid-sized companies, there are opportunities to really target it, even if it's down to a couple of destinations. Moving to the right, on the right hand, and it's very interesting, I put the words both primary and secondary hotel offering. So typically, a secondary offering could be, depending on the spend and what could be negotiated, it could be a chain-wide agreement. It could also be the travel management company's hotel program that they negotiate as a good supplement, or sometimes it could be both, and it really depends. For companies that don't have the scale to have a chain wide, the travel management program is a great program. What you want to ensure, of course, is that secondary offering is leading in coverage, and coverage is key for a client's secondary and tertiary markets, and has discounts and benefits, as well as amenity benefits. Then moving to the third piece on the bottom right is ensuring that you have the technologies and the ability to actually deliver that inventory to the traveler, whether it's through the corporate online booking tool that will ensure you get the savings, the analytics, as well as monitoring whether the hotel on the supply side is complying with the rates and the travelers are being able to reach those rates. The third piece I have, which I'm calling non-primary services, is again with all the emerging technologies, either within the negotiated program or where the negotiated program doesn't cover, there's enormous opportunity to deliver incremental benefits in terms of savings through new technologies, through reshop. And again, for every single client, this balance is going to be a little bit different, at least in the current state of the industry, based on what I've seen.
Great.
Okay.
Nice.
Should we move to the next one? So in terms of helping strike that balance, there are really 9 key questions that a travel manager, regardless of what company they work for, particularly if they're new and they're building a program for the first time. One is really, what are the goals of the program? Certain companies, they vary in terms of culture. Is cost reduction paramount, or is traveler satisfaction the primary objective? And sometimes it relates to, the reporting structure or the type of company. And I've worked, you can imagine, financial services, private equity, it will probably be focused on traveler engagement. In certain heavy manufacturing industries, there is still a very heavy weighting on the cost component. Is the travel policy and its overall employee culture aligned with those goals? Because that's really going to indicate the company's ability to actually deliver. And that's really important in the areas, in markets where the company is negotiating a fixed rate. When analyzing a company's travel patterns, including detailed information on the types of where the travelers stay, when you look at the card spend, when you look at the travel spend, do those patterns align or deviate from the goals of the program? I had some very interesting experiences working with a private equity company where you had, the managing directors and the partners of a parent company staying at very different places than a subsidiary company that's a manufacturing company. And those are things you need to take into account in terms of selecting the right properties that fit from a cost and traveler engagement perspective. When you have a contracted program, it's always good to actually look at the percentage of travelers that stay at a company's contracted preferred program versus a non-program, to even get an understanding of the level and degree there'll be of compliance, because that will inform you when you choose those 4 buckets where the weighting should be. And negotiating fixed rates might be more difficult if it's not a compliant culture, or a change might have to happen. Moving forward in the next slide. Again, this really ties back to the analytics. What are the key travel markets? Where is a hotel spend concentrated? Because you want to make sure when you go through an RFP process that you're getting a strong return on the investment. So you don't want to focus that in markets where you're not driving a lot of room nights. In destinations with heavy traffic, what hotel brands and chains do your travelers book? And that's really important, because if you have a lot of spend in a destination where there could be independent hotels and chains, it might make sense to negotiate the fixed rate with the independent hotel, the dynamic rate with the chain a property that belongs to one of the major chains, because the major chains are more receptive to dynamic rates. So that's key. You also might be a company that has a certain commercial relationship, providing catering or cleaning services to the hotel. That can be used as leveraged as well. Number 7, do you have contracted hotels in non-key markets? I've seen clients that go out to bid and have an RFP process where they do 2 or 3 room nights a year. Well, those are markets where you just want to take out of that process. That's the opportunity to use a TMC, or if there's a larger spend amount, use a chain-wide agreement. What key performance indicators do you use to measure success and target opportunities? The average daily rate in the negotiated program, or average daily rate for non-hotel programs. That's something you want to, with the reporting tools, you want to measure that too, in terms of targeting where you should renegotiate, or maybe there might be hotels that just simply have to be removed from the preferred program. And then, of course, ensuring, are your suppliers loading rates correctly at the start of the program over time? If you see non-compliance on the supplier part, again, that's a question whether they should be in the program or not and be removed.
So, David, it seems to me that, oops, I didn't mean to do that. Obviously, there's ways of doing it, right? And being able to combine, multiple different items within the program, but that data and analytics is what's going to help get them started. And I think that that's really key, and that corporate culture is going to make a huge difference. So, no, I really appreciate it. That was great insight. So now we've got some things that people can take away and ask themselves about their programs. A question did come in, so thank you very much, David. I appreciate it. A question did come in if we're going to have share the presentation, and so the answer is yes. We will have the actual PowerPoint posted on the website, as well as the recording of the actual webinar. So just wanted to give everyone a heads up about that. I'd like to turn it over now to Steve, my friend Steve from TRIPBAM. He's been in the industry for a long time, as long as I have, and has an amazing product called TRIPBAM. I think Steve's going to share some insights as how these reshopper type tools work, right, and how they can fit into that managed travel program. So, Steve, I'm going to turn it over to you for the next few minutes, and then we'll open it up for Q&A. So it's all yours.
All right, thanks, Jen. So just real quick, at a high level, I want to talk about how these reshoppers work. So for the most part, the bookings are captured in a variety of different ways. They can be direct through Traxo, they can be from the TMC through the GDS, and so on. And it's a real important step that as many hotel bookings as possible make their way into these systems as you can get. The next step is determining how you want to find lower rates. There's a million different settings and variables and so on that can be applied. Those can vary even within a company. You might have the VIPs and the CEOs treated significantly different in how you might handle staff travel. And one of the key things that we talk about with our clients is, do you want to apply clustering or not? And a cluster is, I'm not only going to shop the hotel that's booked and make sure that the bed type and room type are consistent, but also maybe look at other hotels nearby that meet a very specific criteria for quality, distance, and so on. The third step is, what rates do you want to consider? Are we going to look at your corporate discounted rates, obviously, agency discounts, consortia discounts, publicly available discounts, AAA, military, government, and so on, chain-wide discounts? Can we add those to the mix? What we're finding is the broader set of rates that you can include, the more success you're going to have in a reshopping scenario. And then last but not least, once that savings is found, what do we do? Do we automatically rebook it? Or do we email the traveler or someone within the company or someone within the agency as a part approval step before that rebooking is made? And with the last step in the process being, pulling up the PNR and capturing that lower rate and realizing the savings. So that's the kind of the 1, 2, 3, 4 step. But the big step is the one at the bottom, which is, as you're going through this process, capturing data and producing analytics and reporting to help improve your hotel program. What we found over the last couple of years is there's significantly more savings to be achieved by improving the hotel program than there is just from taking advantage of daily rate fluctuation. And I'll show you some examples of that. So Jen, can you go to the next slide?
I can.
So one of the panels in our dashboard that's gotten extremely popular across our clients is this one here. Each of the dots represent a preferred hotel, and the statistics across the top represent the overall stats and savings that are being achieved by the hotel program over whatever period of time. And so what the customers do is any hotel that ends up in sort of that red or pink quadrant, it's time to renegotiate, and it's time to drive that to the right side and turn that into a green circle and consolidate the spend as much as you can. And so two things happen. One is your hotel program, the savings goes up dramatically. And second, you narrow down the number of hotels in your program to those that really are providing bang for the buck. Those that are in that lower quadrant, you really don't have enough volume to justify a dynamic discount. That discount really isn't providing any value as compared to the market. And why don't we just let those be handled through a dynamic rate or monitoring to TRIPBAM? So in the case of EY, they're somewhat synonymous of that theory, which is reduce the number of hotels. Let's get a lot more dynamic in place, and you'll start to see the savings go up. But the other thing that we're helping companies do is actually quantify the value of their hotel program. You can see in this example, the client has saved 1.7 million in actual realized savings by having negotiated discounts in place. And that's actually the savings that's been achieved. It's not just a savings number guesstimate based on if travelers had booked, it's actual bookings where a discount was applied as comparing it to the lowest qualified rate the traveler would have booked if there wasn't a discount available at that hotel. So that's just one example of how you can use analytics to improve your program. Jen, can you go to the next slide, please? All right. This one here is using benchmarking. And we've got an example of I'm looking at hotels for this particular client in the New York market. We've narrowed it down to 4-star properties, and we're focused in on the Westin New York Grand Central. You can see across the top the average rates that are paid, discounted, booked, as well as the lowest qualified rate, which we consider kind of that benchmark rate. But then also at the bottom, we're comparing the rates booked by this client to a benchmark across all of the large companies that are in our system. And it gives you a whole new metric to decide, do I have a good deal or not? And is it time to renegotiate? Should I try and drive something better? In this example, the client's got a great deal. They've got a discount that's generating about 24% relative to the market, whereas the large market is closer to 12.5%. And their LRA score is really high. They're getting that discount roughly 99% of the time, which is great. I mean, the hotel is performing well on both of those metrics, but if you go down a little bit, you can see hotels where the discount is light or the LRA performance is light. And those are ones that you probably ought to either remove from the program or renegotiate.
Steve, a question came in. I want to ask, have you seen in the data that you've got, like, is there an optimal number of room nights at a hotel where, you can get a good deal, so to speak?
Yeah, no, I mean, the rule of thumb is 100. So if you have 100 room nights annually, you probably have enough volume to get at least a response back from a hotel. However, it's a rule of thumb. I've seen hotels do crazy things just to get a discount in place with a selected client, and they'll offer significantly deep discounts in return for some very small volume. And I've seen the opposite. I've seen a customer that can probably commit 300-400 room nights at least to a property, but they can't get the hotel to respond because they don't want the business, because they can sell those rooms, at those higher rates, and they don't have to discount. So, I mean, it's really hard to say.
Gotcha. So, on this document, the average of LQR, how is that calculated?
So on every single booking that we receive, as we're looking for lower rates, we're capturing the lowest qualified rate at that hotel. And what we mean by that is the same bed type, it's the same room type, but we don't apply any of those corporate negotiated discounts. It's the rate that the traveler would have paid for that standard room with a king bed if you didn't have a discount in place. It's not the bar, it's not the best available rate, which in my opinion is sort of like full fare in the airline industry.
Right.
More realistic. It's the rate that they're going to pay if they go to the website, if they go through their online booking tool, and it just happens to be a hotel without a discount. So in the example at the bottom at the New York, the average for our clients is 409. That's the average rate that those travelers would have booked, but the negotiated rate is closer to 350. which is where you're getting that 12.5% discount.
Great. Okay, gotcha.
So next slide.
Yes, there you go.
So to kind of wrap things up, we do this with most of our clients. It's for same hotel shopping, if you're using fairly strict settings, you should expect about a 3% overall decrease in your savings overall, your net cost. If you start looking at variances where you're allowing a different bed type and room type and amenity package and so on, you can drive that up to about 5%. When you start applying clusters, which is what we described, and you do it in a strategic way, you're trying to shift share, trying to find opportunities below a city cap, and such, you can get it to 8. And then when you really start, improving the hotel program, fixing those LRA issues, removing hotels, from the program, optimizing the whole RFP process, you can see about a 10 to 12% overall decrease, in your hotel spend. And so for me, it's that 5 to 12% where the real bang for the buck, and not just the 2 to 3% that you get from that real strict, daily rate shopping.
Gotcha. Steve, I have a question for you because you have something on this slide that always piques my interest, and I know you and I have talked about this in the past, but if I, as a buyer, am maybe not receiving commissions back from my hotel program, maybe it's not big enough to negotiate that, or the fee structure I've chosen, they're not sharing that revenue, it would seem to me that the TMC would be aggressively wanting to do these reshoppers, because it could go from my corporate rate as non-commissionable to a commissionable rate, right? And then that leads to a conversation, with the hotels that is different, because now why are you always undercutting my corporate rate, and what's happening, and now the agency's benefiting. How have your customers balanced that? I know there's been a lot of talk in the industry about that.
Yeah, I think you have to have transparency into how the system is set up. You need to know what bookings are flowing through the system and so on. And you need to know that every time that happens, that there's savings achieved. If you can save $50, but it's taking a booking off of a negotiated rate onto a publicly available commissionable rate, or $100 or whatever that the threshold might be set, great. I don't see why. I still get the booking credit at the hotel. It's just because it's not a negotiated rate. It's still booked on maybe a bar rate. I still hit my room night commitment, but because that hotel decided to drop the rate and have a fire sale, that's a rate better than my net negotiated rate. It just feels like I should be able to take advantage of that when it occurs. And if I can get a solution for my travel agency, either for free or at a big discount as a result of that, it seems like everybody wins, in that equation. So
sure.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Can companies contract directly, or do they have to, and then integrate with the TMC, or do they have to go through their TMC? I mean, how? That's just maybe a logistical question. Maybe what if the TMC doesn't participate with TRIPBAM? Is that still an option?
Yeah,
if they want to take advantage of this.
Yeah, we have reseller relationships with most of the major TMCs around the globe, so I don't know that that'd be an option. So the customers have a choice. They could either go direct or they can go through the TMC. Most of our clients buy the product through their TMC for a whole variety of different reasons. But we do have a fairly large number that buy direct as well. And so that really is kind of a case-by-case client decision.
Okay, great. Steve, thank you so much. I want to open it up to questions because we've got a lot coming in, and I want to make sure we can get to all of them. If we can't, I'll get to as many as possible. We'll follow up with the questions and with the people presenting them, and then get you some answers from any of our presenters today. But just to tee it off, I think what we're hearing, is everyone agrees that the process maybe is broken. The RFP system is systematically dysfunctional sometimes and functional at the same time. And it's really finding that balance. And so you can see that you can take a very large program to a very small program and sort of make it unique and creative, and having different conversations with the properties themselves that can actually drive the change that, we hear the industry talking about all the time. So let me just get to the next slide here. All right. So a question came in about duty of care, and this is for Karen. If you just let people stay under the city caps, do you have any worries about the safety of the properties or concepts around security and stuff?
So what we did is we have master services agreements in place with all of the chains that we have the dynamic pricing with, and then with the independent hotels where we've got rates with them, then they're still having to sign our terms and conditions as well. So we actually have not opened it up to any hotel under the cap. We've done it with the chains, but we happen to have signed master service agreements with multiple number of chains, and then we've done an individual contract with the independent hotels.
Okay, gotcha. Steve, a question for you. When you're doing the reshopping, are you considering the amenities that have been negotiated, and is it like for like, or how is that working?
Yeah, we consider all the amenities. I mean, so the breakfast, the Wi-Fi, the parking, the club level access, the cancellation policy, all that can be factored in to those like for like settings. And
Okay.
you can apply a dollar amount to them. So if breakfast is lost, we've got to raise the savings threshold by $10, $20, whatever you think is appropriate. Or you can say, look, just reject it completely. Don't consider an offer if breakfast isn't included. And you can do that for all of them.
All right, good. Okay. Let's see. I'm just trying to find all the questions here. Again, for Karen, are you negotiating amenities with those properties?
We are, yeah. We have two standards actually that we really focus on negotiating, which is internet access and not having to pay to go to the gym. I know in the US, invariably you don't, but outside of the US, you often have charges for the gym. So those are our two given. And then there are some countries where it's normal practice to have breakfast included. So if it's a city specifically that some hotels give breakfast, then we try and get it blanket across the board, basically. But yeah, we do negotiate amenities as much as possible. But what the team has been able to do is negotiate many more value adds. So it may be that it's room upgrades, drink in the bar, frequent point stay. So they're spending a lot of time negotiating those sort of additional amenities, which we then show in our TripAdvisor tool, our internal tool.
Okay, great. All right. I think I've got all the questions answered so far. I know. A question for David. Through a sourcing exercise, kind of tell me again what you were seeing, like the average savings being, because I think Steve, you mentioned you were seeing 5 to 12%. Obviously EY's had a very successful launch of their dynamic pricing, which has driven down costs with their city caps. In a traditional sourcing model, David, kind of what are you seeing savings wise in a program?
In terms of a traditional, I've seen, and I'll actually cover, companies say between 4 million and 10 million in spend, and I've seen compared to best available rate, literally up to 27%. And that's not survey data. That's actually, linking negotiated rates to the same properties that are offering best available in the same at the same hotel in the same time period.
Gotcha. Great. Perfect. So that, I think we've covered all the questions. If there are any questions that may have come through that I've missed, we'll be sure and get an answer to you back. But I think really it is like magic, right? Hotel sorcery. It's not just the standard same old way we've always done things, right? Whether it's driving technologies that help to manage the program better, whether it's creative technologies like a TRIPBAM or reshopping platforms and stuff that, drive sort of that next level of savings, even when you've got, a really tightly woven, hotel sourced, managed program, whatever. I think it's just really important that as an industry, especially for buyers, right? Because we have this big voice, that we start to have more creative conversations with our hoteliers. And hey, everybody benefits. The hotels don't have to invest, when they can be more creative, as many resources in the process, the corporation, a third party, whatever it might be, that can kind of mold something that looks unique based on who the actual client is, taking that kind of traveler centricity into mind, and then delivering something that's effective, both cost effective and also, pleasing to the travelers, which then helps us gain more compliance, which drives more savings, and on and on. So I would like to thank, we're just a minute over, but I want to thank everyone for attending. Once again, on the Business Travel Executive website, you will be able to download a copy of the presentation and also watch the webinar. We'll post it within the next day or so. So thank you again, Karen, David, Steve, for all your insights. That was amazing. I really appreciate it. And on behalf of BT, I want everyone to have a great day. Thanks again. Take care.